The auctioneer's hammer came down on her future when she was 15 years old, and Grace Wellington never stopped running from that moment. Not even now, 10 years later, as she crouched behind a stack of hay bales in a barn outside Cody, Wyoming, listening to boots scrape across wooden planks above her head. Her father had been a drunk and a gambler, the kind of man who would sell his own daughter to pay off debts he accumulated in dingy saloons scattered across the Wyoming territory. The year was 1878, and women had little say in their own destinies, especially when their fathers decided those destinies for them. Grace remembered standing on that block in a dusty town square somewhere in Nevada, remembered the way men had looked at her like she was livestock, remembered the cold terror that had seized her chest when the bidding started. She had been a child, barely old enough to understand what was happening, but old enough to know she had to escape. And escape she did, that very night, before the man who bought her could collect his purchase. She had run through the darkness with nothing but the dress on her back and a desperate will to survive. For 10 years, she had been running, taking odd jobs, changing her name, moving from town to town whenever someone looked at her too long or asked too many questions. She had learned to shoot, to ride, to defend herself. She had learned to trust no one. Now, hiding in this barn in Cody, Wyoming, she held her breath as the footsteps moved overhead. She had been working as a seamstress in town for 3 months, the longest she had stayed anywhere in years, and she thought maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. But yesterday, a man had ridden into town, a man with hard eyes who claimed to be looking for a woman who matched her description. Grace had learned long ago not to take chances. The footsteps stopped directly above her hiding spot. Grace's hand moved to the small pistol she kept tucked in her skirt pocket, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was 25 years old, and she was tired of running, but she would run for the rest of her life if it meant staying free. "I know you are in here," a man's voice called out, deep and steady, with a hint of something she could not quite place. Not menace exactly, but determination. "I am not here to hurt you. My name is Colton Kincaid, and I have been looking for you for a long time." Grace pressed herself tighter against the hay bales, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had heard promises like that before, honeyed words meant to lure her out of hiding. She would not fall for them again. "Your father is dead," the voice continued, and Grace felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Died 3 months ago in a saloon brawl in Virginia City. Before he died, he told me what he did to you. He told me about the auction." Grace's hands trembled. Her father dead. She should have felt something, grief or relief or anger, but all she felt was a hollow emptiness. The man who had brought her into this world had also tried to destroy it, and now he was gone. "He was my uncle," Colton Kincaid said, his voice softer now. "I did not know about you until he confessed on his deathbed. I have spent the last 3 months tracking you down, following the trail of names you left behind. Grace, Gwendolyn, Georgia, Gloria. You are good at disappearing, but I am good at finding people." Grace closed her eyes. An uncle. She had not known her father had a brother. Then again, she had not known much about her father at all, except that he valued whiskey and cards more than his own child. "I am not here to take you anywhere you do not want to go," Colton continued. "I am here to tell you that you do not have to run anymore. The man who bought you at that auction, he is dead too. Shot by a lawman 2 years ago in a dispute over a stolen horse. Anyone else who might have been looking for you, they have given up. It has been 10 years. You are free, free." The word sounded foreign to Grace's ears, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. She had been running for so long that she did not know how to stop, did not know how to be anything other than a woman on the move. "I am going to leave now," Colton said. I am staying at the boarding house on Main Street if you want to talk, but I will not come looking for you again. I just wanted you to know the truth." The footsteps moved away, descending the ladder from the loft. Grace heard the barn door creak open and then close. She waited, counting her breaths, making sure he was truly gone before she emerged from her hiding spot. Her legs shook as she stood, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. She moved to the barn door and peered out through a crack in the wood. A man stood in the yard outside, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing worn denim and a dusty hat. He was leading a horse toward the gate, his movements easy and unhurried. Even from this distance, Grace could see the sun-bronzed skin of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the way he carried himself with a quiet confidence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. Colton Kincaid. Her cousin, apparently, though they had never met. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, heading back toward town, and something in her chest loosened just a fraction. That night, Grace lay awake in the small room she rented above the seamstress shop, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Colton's words. Could it be true? Could she really stop running? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She had built her entire life around the need to keep moving, to never settle, to never let anyone get close enough to hurt her. What would she do if she did not have to run anymore? When dawn broke, Grace made a decision. She dressed carefully, pinning her dark hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, and walked to the boarding house on Main Street. Her heart pounded with each step, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. The boarding house was a two-story building with a wide porch and rocking chairs lined up along the front. Grace climbed the steps and knocked on the door. A kindly-looking woman with gray hair answered, smiling warmly. "Can I help you, dear?" "I am looking for Colton Kincaid," Grace said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is he staying here?" "Oh yes, he is in room 4 upstairs. Shall I fetch him for you? Thank you." Grace waited in the parlor, perching on the edge of a worn sofa and twisting her hands in her lap. She heard footsteps on the stairs, and then he was there, standing in the doorway, and Grace got her first real look at the man who claimed to be her cousin. He was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes the color of warm honey. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He looked at her with an expression of such profound relief that Grace felt something shift inside her chest. "You came," he said simply. "You said my father is dead. He is. I buried him myself in Virginia City." Grace nodded slowly, processing this information. "Tell me how he died." Colton moved into the room and sat down in a chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "He got into a fight over a card game. Someone pulled a knife. It was quick, if that helps." "It does not," Grace said, and found that she meant it. "But I appreciate you telling me." They sat in silence for a moment, studying each other. Grace saw no deception in Colton's face, no hidden agenda lurking behind his eyes. He looked tired, like a man who had traveled a long way and carried a heavy burden. "Why did you come looking for me?" Grace asked finally. "You did not know I existed until 3 months ago." "You could have let me stay disappeared." Colton rubbed a hand across his jaw, considering his words carefully. "My uncle, your father, he was not a good man. I knew that even before he confessed what he did to you. But when he told me about the auction, about selling his own daughter, I knew I had to try to make it right. You deserve to know that you are free, that no one is coming after you anymore." "And that is all," Grace pressed. "You just wanted to deliver a message." Something flickered in Colton's eyes, something she could not quite read. "I also wanted to meet you. You are my cousin. You are family. I thought maybe if you wanted we could know each other. Family. Another word that sounded foreign. Grace had not had family since her mother died when she was 12, leaving her alone with a father who saw her as property rather than a person. I do not know how to do that, Grace admitted, the words coming out before she could stop them. I do not know how to be family to anyone. Neither do I, Colton said with a small smile. My father, your father's brother, he died when I was young. I have been on my own for a long time. Maybe we can figure it out together. Grace wanted to say yes. The word was right there on her tongue, eager to be spoken. But 10 years of running had taught her to be cautious, to question every kindness, to look for the trap beneath every offer of help. I need time to think, she said, standing up. This is a lot to take in. Of course. Colton stood as well, towering over her by a good 6 inches. Take all the time you need. I will be here. Grace left the boarding house and walked back through town, her mind spinning. She spent the day at the seamstress shop, but her hands moved mechanically through the work, stitching hems and taking in waistlines while her thoughts were miles away. Her employer, Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes and a talent for reading people, noticed her distraction. Something on your mind, Grace? Grace hesitated, then decided that maybe, just maybe, it was time to tell someone the truth. There is a man in town. He says he is my cousin. He says that the people I have been running from are dead, and I do not have to run anymore. Mrs. Henderson set down the dress she was working on and gave Grace her full attention. And do you believe him? I do not know. I want to, but I have been running for so long I do not know how to stop. What does your heart tell you? Grace had not listened to her heart in 10 years. She had not dared to. The heart wanted things that were dangerous, things like connection and trust and love. The heart could get you killed. But when she thought about Colton Kincaid, about the way he had looked at her with such genuine relief, about the way he had offered her family with no strings attached, her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. My heart is tired, Grace said softly. It is tired of running. Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted her hand. Then maybe it is time to rest. That evening, Grace returned to the boarding house. Colton was sitting on the porch in one of the rocking chairs, watching the sun set over the mountains in the distance. When he saw her, he stood up, his expression hopeful. I want to hear everything, Grace said without preamble. I want to know about my father's family, about where you come from, about how you found me. I want to know if I can trust you. Colton nodded. That is fair. Would you like to take a walk? We can talk while we walk. They left the boarding house and strolled through Cody as the evening settled in around them. The town was growing, benefiting from its proximity to Yellowstone and the streams of tourists and settlers passing through. Oil had been discovered in the area recently, and there was a sense of opportunity in the air, of new beginnings. Colton told her about their family, about how his father and her father had grown up in Missouri, sons of a farmer who worked himself to death trying to make a living from stubborn land. Colton's father had headed west to find better opportunities and had settled in Colorado, where he worked as a ranch hand until a horse threw him and broke his neck. Colton had been 17 at the time. I have been working cattle drives and odd jobs ever since, Colton said. Moving from place to place, never really settling anywhere. I guess running is in our blood. Grace felt a kinship with that, with the idea of a family that could not stand still. And my father, he stayed in Missouri for a while, got married to your mother. From what I understand, she was a good woman. When she died, he fell apart, started drinking, gambling, moving west to escape his debts. Colton paused, his jaw tightening. I wish I had known about you sooner. I wish I could have stopped him from doing what he did. You could not have known, Grace said, though the words felt hollow. She had spent so many years wishing someone would save her, and no one ever had. She had learned to save herself. They walked in silence for a while, making their way to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the mountains standing like sentinels in the distance. "What happened after the auction?" Colton asked quietly. "How did you get away?" Grace had never told anyone the full story. She had kept it locked inside her, a dark secret that haunted her dreams. But standing here with Colton, with someone who was family even if they were strangers, she found herself wanting to share it. "The man who bought me, he was a mine owner from Nevada. He had plans for me, plans that would have destroyed whatever was left of my childhood. But he made a mistake. He was overconfident. He left me alone for a few hours while he concluded some business, thinking I was too scared to run. And I was scared, terrified, but I was more terrified of what would happen if I stayed." Grace swallowed hard, the memories rushing back with painful clarity. "I climbed out a window and ran. I stole a horse from a stable, rode it until it nearly collapsed, then walked for days until I found another town. I lied about my age, said I was 18, and found work as a laundress. I stayed there for 6 months before someone started asking questions, and then I ran again. I have been running ever since." Colton was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You were just a child. You should have been protected. You should have been safe." "Should have been," Grace agreed, "but I was not. So I learned to protect myself." They stood there as the last light faded from the sky, and Grace felt something inside her begin to crack open, like ice breaking apart after a long winter. She had spent 10 years alone, trusting no one, letting no one get close. But maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to let someone in. Over the next few weeks, Grace and Colton fell into an easy routine. He found work at one of the nearby ranches, breaking horses and mending fences, while Grace continued her work at the seamstress shop. In the evenings, they would meet for dinner at the town's small restaurant, or take walks along the river that ran through Cody, talking about everything and nothing. Grace learned that Colton was 27, just 2 years older than she was. She learned that he was good with horses, patient and gentle in a way that surprised her. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor and a tendency to notice small details, like when she was tired or when something was bothering her. She learned that he was the kind of man who kept his word, who showed up when he said he would, who did not make promises he could not keep. And Colton learned about Grace. He learned that she was fiercely independent, wary of accepting help from anyone. He learned that she had a quick mind and nimble fingers, that she could sew a straight seam and shoot a tin can off a fence post from 50 yards away. He learned that she loved to read, devouring any book she could get her hands on, and that she had taught herself to read and write better during her years on the run. He learned that beneath her tough exterior, there was a woman who had been deeply hurt and was desperately afraid of being hurt again. One evening, about a month after they met, they were sitting by the river, watching the water flow past. The summer heat had settled over Wyoming, making the days long and warm, and Grace had loosened her hair from its usual bun, letting it fall down her back in dark waves. "I have been thinking," Colton said, skipping a stone across the water's surface, "about staying here, in Cody. The ranch owner offered me a permanent position. Good pay, a place to live. I am thinking about taking it." Grace's heart did an odd little flip in her chest. "You would settle down, stop moving." "I am tired of moving," Colton admitted. "I am tired of not having a place to call home. And I like it here. The work is good, the people are decent, and you are here." Those last words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Grace looked at Colton, really looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was not the look of a cousin regarding family. It was something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. "Colton," she said carefully, "we are family." "We are barely family," Colton said, turning to face her fully. "We share a grandfather we never met. We did not grow up together. We did not even know each other existed until a month ago." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I know what you are thinking. I know it is complicated. But Grace, I cannot pretend that what I feel for you is cousinly affection. It has not been for weeks now." Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had been trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when Colton was near, the way she found herself looking for him in crowds, the way his smile could brighten even her darkest moods. She had told herself it was just gratitude, just the relief of having someone who understood her past, but she knew, deep down, that it was more than that. "I have never let myself feel this way about anyone," Grace whispered. "I have never let anyone close enough." "I know," Colton said gently. "And I am not asking you to rush into anything. I just needed you to know how I feel. That I care about you, not as a cousin, but as a woman I deeply admire and am falling in love with. Falling in love." The words should have sent Grace running for the hills, should have triggered every instinct she had developed over 10 years of surviving alone. Instead, they settled over her like a warm blanket, like something she had been waiting for without knowing it. "I am afraid," Grace admitted. "I am afraid that if I let myself feel this, if I let myself trust this, something will happen to take it away." Colton reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I am afraid too, but I am more afraid of not taking the chance. You have been running your whole life, Grace. Maybe it is time to stop running and start living." Grace looked down at their joined hands, at the way her smaller fingers fit perfectly between his larger ones. She thought about all the years she had spent alone, all the times she had watched other people find love and told herself it was not for her, that she was too damaged, too broken, too afraid. But maybe she did not have to be afraid anymore. Maybe she could choose something different. She looked up at Colton, at his honest eyes and his hopeful expression, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative, her first real kiss in 10 years of running. Colton made a soft sound of surprise and then kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. It was not a passionate kiss, not desperate or demanding. It was a promise, a beginning, a choice to stop running and start building something real. When they pulled apart, Grace was trembling, but she was smiling, really smiling for the first time in as long as she could remember. "I want to try," she said softly. "I want to try to do this, to be with you, even though it scares me." "We will take it slow," Colton promised. "As slow as you need. I am not going anywhere." And he did not. Over the next months, Colton kept his promise. He took the permanent position at the ranch and moved into a small cabin on the property. He courted Grace the old-fashioned way, with flowers picked from the meadows and picnics by the river and long conversations that stretched into the night. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, never made her feel like she owed him anything. Grace blossomed under his patient attention. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her heart, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cherished, to be valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. Colton made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before, safe enough to let her guard down, to be vulnerable, to trust. The town of Cody watched their courtship with approval. Grace had been working at the seamstress shop long enough that people had come to know and like her, and Colton's quiet strength and honest work ethic had earned him respect at the ranch. When they walked through town together, holding hands and stealing glances at each other. People smiled and nodded, happy to see two young people finding love. Mrs. Henderson was particularly pleased. "I knew when you first asked me about him that there was something special there," she told Grace one afternoon as they worked on a wedding dress for a young woman in town. "You have a light in your eyes now that was not there before." Grace touched the delicate lace they were sewing onto the dress, thinking about weddings and futures and all the things she had never let herself dream about. "I never thought I could have this," she admitted. "I never thought I deserved it. Everyone deserves love, dear Mrs. Henderson said firmly, "especially those who have suffered without it for so long." As summer turned to fall, and the aspens on the mountainsides blazed gold and orange, Colton asked Grace to marry him. They were at their spot by the river, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling air, when he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I have left of her. I know we have only known each other for 6 months, and I know your past makes you wary of commitments. But Grace, I love you. I love your strength and your courage and your fierce determination to survive. I love the way you read 3 books at once, and the way you hum when you are sewing, and the way you look at the mountains like they hold all the secrets of the universe. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Grace looked at the ring, at Colton's hopeful face, at the future he was offering her. Every instinct she had developed over 10 years told her to run, to protect herself, to not risk this kind of vulnerability. But she had spent 6 months learning to trust, learning that not everyone would hurt her, learning that love could be a source of strength rather than weakness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Colton's face broke into the biggest smile Grace had ever seen, and he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her forget the cold, forget everything except the warmth of his embrace, and the joy singing through her veins. They were married in November of 1878, in a small ceremony at the church in Cody. Mrs. Henderson helped Grace make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery on the bodice. The ranch owner stood up as Colton's best man, and Mrs. Henderson stood with Grace. The whole town turned out to witness the union, packing the small church to capacity. As Grace walked down the aisle toward Colton, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the scared 15-year-old girl standing on an auction block, certain her life was over. She thought about the years of running, of looking over her shoulder, of never letting anyone get close. She thought about the day Colton found her in that barn and told her she was free. And now, here she was, walking toward a future she had never dared to imagine. A future with a man who loved her, who knew her past and accepted it, who made her feel like she was worth something more than the price her father had put on her head. Colton's eyes were bright with emotion as she reached him, and when the preacher asked if he would take Grace to be his wife, his "I do" rang out strong and clear, a vow that echoed through the church and settled deep in Grace's heart. They spent their wedding night in Colton's cabin at the ranch, which Grace had helped him fix up over the past months, adding curtains and rugs and small touches that made it feel like a home. Colton was gentle and patient, aware that this was new territory for Grace, that her past had taught her to fear intimacy rather than embrace it. But there in the candlelight, with the sound of wind rustling through the pines outside, Grace let go of her fear and let herself be loved. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, and Colton traced lazy patterns on Grace's bare shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Grace thought about the question, really considered it. Happiness was something she had not let herself feel for so long that it almost seemed foreign. But lying here, safe and warm and loved, she realized that yes, she was happy. Deeply, genuinely happy in a way she had never been before. "Yes," she said, tilting her head to look up at him. "I am happy." "Are you?" "Happier than I have ever been," Colton said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You are everything I never knew I was looking for." They built a life together over the next year. Colton continued his work at the ranch, earning enough that Grace could eventually leave her job at the seamstress shop if she wanted to, though she chose to keep working part-time because she enjoyed it. They expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. They adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt that followed Colton home one day and refused to leave. They made friends and put down roots and created the kind of stable, peaceful existence that Grace had never thought she could have. But the past has a way of showing up when you least expect it. It was a spring day in 1880, more than a year after their wedding, when a stranger rode into Cody asking questions about a woman who had been sold at an auction 15 years prior. The stranger was not looking for Grace specifically, but for information about the man who had bought her, the mine owner who had died years ago. There were questions about his estate, about inheritances and claims. Word spread quickly through Cody, the way it always did in small towns, and by the time Grace heard about it, the stranger had already been asking around about anyone who might have known the mine owner or his business dealings. Grace's hands shook as she hemmed a dress at the shop, listening to Mrs. Henderson relay the gossip. "They say he is looking for any women the mine owner might have purchased," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carefully neutral. "Something about restitution, about making things right. The government wants to track down any victims and provide compensation." Compensation. As if money could give back the years of fear, the loss of innocence, the life Grace could have had if her father had not put her on that auction block. But even as bitterness welled up inside her, Grace felt something else too. A tiny spark of hope. Maybe this was a chance to truly close that chapter of her life, to confront what had happened and move forward without the weight of it always pressing on her shoulders. That evening, she told Colton about the stranger. They were sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set, when Grace spoke. "There is a man in town asking about the mine owner who bought me. He is looking for the women who were victimized, something about the government providing restitution." Colton's jaw tightened, the way it always did when Grace's past came up. "Do you want to talk to him?" "I do not know," Grace admitted. "Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, to pretend I have always been Grace Kincaid, happy wife to a rancher in Wyoming. But another part of me thinks maybe I need to face it, to acknowledge what happened instead of running from it." "You are not running anymore," Colton reminded her gently. "You stopped running when you decided to stay here, when you decided to build a life with me. Whatever you choose to do about this stranger, it is not running. It is choosing what is best for you." Grace leaned against Colton's solid warmth, drawing strength from his presence. "Will you come with me? If I decide to talk to him, of course," Colton said without hesitation. "I will be right beside you, whatever you need." The next day, Grace and Colton went into town to find the stranger. He was staying at the same boarding house where Colton had stayed when he first came to Cody, and the landlady directed them to the parlor where he was reviewing documents. The stranger was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a somber expression. He introduced himself as Harold Patterson, a lawyer from Denver working with the territorial government on cases of human trafficking and forced servitude. "Thank you for coming to see me, Mrs. Kincaid," he said after Grace introduced herself. "I understand this must be difficult, bringing up painful memories, but I want you to know that you are not in any trouble. The government has been working to identify victims of these crimes and provide them with restitution." Grace sat down across from him, Colton taking the seat beside her and keeping a supportive hand on her back. "What do you need to know?" Harold Patterson asked her questions, gentle but thorough, about the auction, about the mine owner, about what had happened afterward. Grace answered as best she could, her voice steady even as she relived those terrifying days. Colton's presence beside her was an anchor, a reminder that she was safe now, that the past could not hurt her anymore. When she finished, Harold Patterson set down his pen and looked at her with genuine compassion. "You were incredibly brave, Mrs. Kincaid, not just for surviving, but for being willing to come forward now. Based on what you have told me, you are entitled to a significant sum in restitution." The mine owner's estate was considerable, and the territory has set aside funds specifically for this purpose. Grace blinked in surprise. She had not come here for money. She had come for closure, for the chance to be heard and acknowledged. "How much?" $5,000. The number hung in the air. $5,000 was more money than Grace had ever imagined having. It was enough to buy land, to build a house, to secure a future. It was, in a strange way, a vindication. A recognition that what had been done to her was wrong, that she deserved compensation for the harm she had suffered. But it also felt hollow. No amount of money could give her back her childhood, could erase the years of fear and running, could undo the damage her father had done. "I do not want his money," Grace said quietly. "I do not want anything that came from him." Harold Patterson nodded as if he had expected this response. "That is entirely your choice, Mrs. Kincaid, but perhaps you could think of it not as his money but as yours. Money that you are owed for what was taken from you. You could use it however you want. Give it to charity, help other women in similar situations, or simply build a better life for yourself. The choice is yours." Grace looked at Colton, who squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, I support you," he said. Grace thought about all the women who were still out there, still running, still afraid. Women who had been sold and abused and told they were worth nothing. Women who, like her, needed someone to tell them they were free, that they could stop running, that they deserved better. "I want to use it to help other women," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "Women who have been through what I have been through. I want to create a place where they can go to be safe, to learn skills, to rebuild their lives." Harold Patterson smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. "I think that is a wonderful idea, Mrs. Kincaid. I can help you set that up if you would like. Make sure the funds are used the way you intend." Over the next months, Grace worked with Harold Patterson and Colton to establish a home for women in Cody. They purchased a large house on the edge of town and converted it into a place where women escaping difficult situations could stay while they got back on their feet. Grace taught sewing classes, helping the women develop skills they could use to support themselves. Colton taught them about horses and ranch work, opening up employment opportunities at the local ranches. They hired a teacher to provide basic education, and a doctor to ensure the women had access to medical care. The Grace Wellington Home for Women opened in the fall of 1880, and within weeks it was full. Women came from all over Wyoming and the surrounding territories, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of safety. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. All of them left stronger, more confident, ready to face the world on their own terms. Grace found a sense of purpose in the work that went beyond anything she had experienced before. Helping these women heal from their trauma helped her heal from her own. She saw herself in each of them, saw the fear and the determination and the desperate hope that life could be better. And she was able to tell them with absolute certainty that it could be. She was living proof. One evening, after a particularly long day at the home, Grace and Colton sat on their porch watching the stars come out. Grace was tired but content, her head resting on Colton's shoulder. "I have been thinking," Colton said, playing with her fingers, "about the future, about our future." Grace tilted her head to look at him. "What about it?" "I want to have a family with you, children. I want to fill this cabin with laughter and noise and all the chaos that comes with raising young ones. What do you think?" Grace had thought about children, of course. It was hard not to, working at the home and seeing the women who came through with children of their own, desperate to provide better lives for them. But she had also been afraid. Afraid that she would not know how to be a good mother, that her own damaged childhood would somehow poison her ability to raise children. But looking at Colton, at this good, kind man who loved her so completely, Grace felt that fear begin to dissolve. She thought about what kind of father he would be, patient and strong and endlessly supportive. She thought about the home they had built together, the life they had created, and she thought that maybe, just maybe, she was ready for this next step. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to have a family with you." Colton's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into a kiss that was tender and full of promise. They sat there under the stars, talking about the future they would build together, about the children they would raise and the life they would give them. Grace became pregnant in the winter of 1881, and their first child, a son they named Thomas, was born in August of 1882. Grace had been terrified throughout the pregnancy, worried that something would go wrong, that she would not be a good mother. But the moment she held Thomas in her arms and looked down at his tiny, perfect face, all her fears melted away. This was her son, hers and Colton's. A new beginning, a fresh start, a life untainted by the darkness of the past. Colton was a devoted father from the very first moment. He would spend hours just holding Thomas, talking to him in a soft voice, showing him the world outside their cabin. Grace would watch them together, father and son, and feel her heart swell with a love so profound, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. Thomas was followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and then another son, William, 2 years after that. The cabin that had once seemed so spacious became cramped with the noise and chaos of 3 young children, and Colton began building an addition, turning their small home into a proper house. Grace continued to run the women's home, though she scaled back her hours to care for her own children. She brought them with her sometimes, letting them play in the garden while she taught sewing classes or met with the women who came seeking help. She wanted her children to grow up understanding that helping others was important, that everyone deserved compassion and a second chance. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Elizabeth was a firecracker, fearless and funny, always getting into mischief. William was the baby, sweet and cuddly, content to spend hours in Grace's lap while she read to him. Cody grew too, transforming from a small frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad came through, bringing more settlers and more opportunities. The women's home expanded, adding more beds and more programs. Grace became something of a local hero, known throughout Wyoming for her work helping vulnerable women rebuild their lives. But through it all, the heart of Grace's world remained her family. Colton, who loved her with a steadiness that never wavered, who made her laugh and held her when she cried and reminded her every day that she was valued and cherished. Her children, who filled her life with joy and purpose, and a fierce determination to give them the childhood she had never had. One evening in 1890, 12 years after their wedding, Grace and Colton sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 8, was teaching Elizabeth, 6, how to rope a fence post, while William, 4, toddled after them trying to keep up. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You ever think about how far we have come?" Colton asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "About everything that has happened since I found you in that barn." Grace thought about the frightened woman she had been, hiding behind hay bales and ready to run at the first sign of danger. She thought about the scared 15-year-old on the auction block, certain her life was over. And she thought about the woman she was now, surrounded by family and love and purpose. "I think about it all the time," Grace said honestly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, that I get to have all of this." "You deserve it," Colton said firmly. "You deserve every bit of happiness you have found. You fought for it, survived for it, and you deserve to enjoy it." Grace leaned into his embrace, watching their children play, and felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. She was not running anymore. She had not run in 12 years. She had planted roots and built a life and created a family. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into something beautiful, helping other women find the same freedom and peace she had found. The scar of her past would always be there. Grace knew that. There would always be moments when a stranger's face or a particular phrase would send her back to that auction block, to those terrifying days of running. But those moments were fewer now, softer, easier to bear. Because she had Colton and she had her children and she had built a life worth living. "I love you," she said, turning to press a kiss to Colton's jaw. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up on me." "I will never give up on you," Colton promised, the same promise he had been making for 12 years. "You are my home, Grace. You and these children. Everything I need is right here." They sat there as the stars began to appear overhead, holding each other and watching their children play, and Grace knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The running was over. She had found her home, her family, her happiness. And she would spend the rest of her life protecting it, nurturing it, and being grateful for every single moment. The years continued to pass in Cody, Wyoming. The turn of the century came and went. Thomas grew into a fine young man who attended university in Denver and returned to Cody to practice law, eventually taking over Harold Patterson's work helping women navigate the legal system. Elizabeth became a teacher, opening a school for girls that emphasized not just academics, but practical skills that could help them achieve independence. William followed in Colton's footsteps, becoming a skilled rancher and horseman, eventually taking over management of the ranch where Colton had worked for so many years. The women's home continued to thrive under Grace's leadership, expanding several times to accommodate the steady stream of women who needed help. Grace trained other women to run similar homes throughout Wyoming and the surrounding states, creating a network of safe places for women escaping abuse or exploitation. Colton and Grace grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their house always full of family during holidays and celebrations. They never tired of each other's company, never lost the ability to make each other laugh, never stopped being grateful for the chance meeting that had brought them together. On a warm summer evening in 1918, 40 years after Colton first found Grace hiding in that barn, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with age, but the love between them burned as brightly as ever. "Do you remember when I first came looking for you?" Colton asked, his voice still strong despite his years. "How scared you were. I remember thinking you were going to drag me back, that it was all a trap," Grace said with a laugh. "I had my hand on my pistol the whole time you were talking, ready to fight my way out if I had to." "I know," Colton said with a grin. "I could see it in your eyes. You looked like a cornered wildcat, ready to strike at any moment." "You were very brave, approaching a cornered wildcat," Grace teased. "Or very foolish," Colton countered. "But I am glad I did. I am glad I found you, Grace. These 40 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, the happy kind, born of gratitude and love. "I am glad you found me too. I am glad I stopped running. You gave me a life I never thought I could have." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Their children and grandchildren were inside, preparing dinner and filling the house with noise and laughter. This was Grace's legacy, she thought. Not the fear and the running and the pain of her early years, but this: family, love. A home built on respect and trust, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserved a second chance. Grace Wellington, who had been sold on an auction block at 15 and spent 10 years running, had finally stopped. And in stopping, she had found everything she had ever needed: love, family, purpose, home. The cowboy who found her had given her more than freedom. He had given her a reason to stay, a reason to fight, a reason to believe that happy endings were possible even for girls who started their stories in the worst possible way. Together, they had built a life that was rich and full and beautiful, a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As the stars came out overhead, Grace leaned her head on Colton's shoulder and smiled. She was home. She had been home for 40 years. And she would never run again. The end.